It's touched me in a way that I can never get away from. Every time I think about it, I wonder what else might have been. That's one thing. All sorts of scenarios in your mind. But what if he hadn't been shot? Be a lot different history.
November 22nd, 1963. 14-year-old Roger Williams, now a Republican U.S. congressman, was getting a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, meeting President John F. Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline at the Texas Hotel in Fort Worth.
And he came around, he had a cigar in his mouth, and he took a puff out of his cigar, put it in the sand urn, shook my mother's hand, came and shook my hand, held my hand, and looked back at my mother and said, "You got a good-looking young man here."
In the early 60s, Julian Reed had his own public relations and advertising firm. Texas Governor John Connally was his prime client. As the president's motorcade traveled through downtown Dallas later that morning, Reed was on the White House press bus, several vehicles behind Kennedy and Connally.
They got about halfway down that block, and all of a sudden, pow, pow, pow.
Reed says the bus went on to Kennedy's next event, and he rushed to Parkland Hospital.
I walked into that room in the hallway, and there were two women, silent, across from each other, waiting to find out whether their husband was dead or alive. And obviously did not attempt to bother the First Lady, but obviously Miss Connally I knew very well, and she was happy to see anybody. I just happened to be the first person that she saw.
Knowing the press would soon be all over the story, Reed asked Mrs. Connally to tell him where everyone was sitting in the car. Later, White House staff announced to reporters the president had died.
As soon as he made that statement and stepped aside, I stepped up in front of the blackboard, and from the little sketch that Miss Connally and I had put together, drew out a sketch on the blackboard of the seating.
Young Roger Williams says he was in Latin class when he heard the news about the man he'd just met.
Principal came and told my teacher what had happened, and he put his hands on his desk and started crying, and then they took us all to the cafeteria where we called our parents to come get us.
Last month, President Trump instructed the National Archives to finally unseal government records related to JFK's assassination, millions of pages, many of which have never been seen.
The conspiracy theories surrounding JFK's death are like a 5-decade-long episode of The X-Files. There's the mysterious umbrella man on the grassy knoll. Was he signaling to the shooter? Did he fire a shot himself? Was the CIA somehow involved? And maybe Lee Harvey Oswald really was just a patsy. Even though there are some curious clues in these documents, do they point to a conspiracy? Historians say, no, they don't.
University of Texas history professor Dr. Jeremy Suri says he's long believed Lee Harvey Oswald was responsible and acted alone. And from what he's seen so far, the new information hasn't changed his mind. So if there's no conspiracy, why did it take so long for the documents to see the light of day?
Well, because the CIA and other agencies, number one, don't want to release information showing that they were suspicious of Oswald and didn't do anything to stop him. They also don't want to release information about the illegal surveillance they were undertaking of people like Martin Luther King Jr. and various others, which shows up in these documents.
If tragedy hadn't struck in Dallas that morning, JFK was due here in Austin. Former KTBC photographer Gordon Wilkeson captured the abandoned setup for Kennedy's welcome at the governor's mansion. City archivist Mike Miller says that night Kennedy would have been at Austin's Municipal Auditorium and Convention Center for a big fundraiser. Thousands of tickets had been sold at $100 a plate.
They had started setting up, so you can see half the tables have skirting, half don't. There's napkins sitting out, and they just stopped in mid-process.
Dr. Suri says President Kennedy probably would have gotten reelected. Johnson's landmark Civil Rights Act might not have been as expansive, but the Vietnam War might have de-escalated sooner.
From Austin's point of view, if you think of the prominence of LBJ, especially in the history of Austin in the 70s, it's a different city. And it's a different city than with less LBJ, perhaps less federal money, less federal attention. You could imagine Austin being a smaller city than it is today.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
No. I wish history was different.
Casey Claiborne, Fox 7 News.